Okay, welcome everyone to the House and Blue Ribbon Committee on March 13th, 2025. We will start with roll call. We'll just go around counterclockwise and please state your name. Assistant Mayor Joanna Kelly.
City Councilor Beth Moreau.
Edward King Anderson.
John O'Leary.
Dagan Migurdich.
I'm not on the committee, but Peter Britz.
Same, Peter Stith.
Those are our staff representatives from the Planning and Sustainability Department. We are short a couple members. Hopefully some more people will stroll in. So on our agenda, first thing our agenda is to look over the list of city-owned properties. This list was first developed in the now sunset Land Use Committee as looking at city-owned parcels that could possibly be redeveloped for below market rate housing. There is also, there were some last minute add-ons per committee request that, hello, welcome. We are officially in quorum. Not that we have any votes this evening so far. You're fine. Okay, so we will just go, we'll start from the top of the packet. The memo says the properties are ranked in order from our last meeting. Some initial pros and cons of each property for each parcel. However, we're looking for additional input from the committee. Should include any recommendations that we would like to potentially bring forward to City Council. So the first lot that we will be discussing is the Lower City parking lot. It right now provides parking and it's 1.3 acres in size. It offers potential development. I'm just reading the notes for the public. Offers potential development for housing which should be built over the existing lot and maintain employee parking. The lot is walkable to downtown, but is also serviced by coast. There are no wetlands on the property and utilities are easily accessible. Development of this parcel should carefully consider the surrounding neighborhoods and dwellings, especially located on Mount Vernon Street, which if nobody remembers, Mount Vernon is just a little kind of, if you're looking behind City Hall, the little neighborhood back there. So I would just open up, I would like to just have kind of round table discussion, how we are thinking and what the committee's thinking about any of these parcels. Would the committee like me to go one by one, or do we want to describe all of them and then have a big conversation? Is there a preference from the committee?
Up to the chair.
I think one by one makes sense
Okay.
just to keep us organized.
Great.
I'm good.
Yes.
I know that the City Hall lot is going to be difficult because you have to displace parking in order to do construction there. So I think that's one of the things that should be taken into consideration when looking at it, is that it will displace neighborhood parking and city used parking. So just one of the aspects that I don't think was mentioned that I wanted to make sure was out there.
John?
Yeah, I agree with Beth, and I think the other thing is too that as we have seen with projects that have been in similar locations, there's certainly a great interest in people who live in the surrounding area for input in the into it. So I think that, you know, frankly, if I can just cut through it, from a political perspective, it's going to be one of the more difficult properties to do.
But from a practical perspective, it seems to make the most sense.
Yeah, that's fine. You know, I'm just, yeah.
And on the parking front, yes, we're going to cause some obstacles for people to park in the short term, but in the long term, the fact that the parking can be kept is also a win-win in my opinion.
Question for staff: what is the height restriction for this? Like,
Well, it's municipal, so
it's not so okay.
Build up.
Can build up there. And it so will build over existing lot and maintain the employee parking. Okay. Oh, I didn't realize it was behind me.
Also, just to circle back to some parking considerations, it's one of the most viable for workforce. I mean, especially if we're talking about the type of people who are going to be working downtown, they wouldn't need a car.
Yeah, good point.
To that end, I just left my downtown job, and I'm the only one that lives in Portsmouth in the group that I just left.
Yeah, I have two employees now who live in Portsmouth. And both of them were housed intentionally in places that are owned by business owners for the purpose of workforce housing.
For staff, yeah.
Another one who's moving into Portsmouth and who will be paying in their single apartment more than my mortgage.
Okay. Again, these are kind of are ranked in order of what we think could be the most viable. I guess some of the pros is that we are, while we are displacing something for any type of construction period, it's displacing cars during any potential future construction period, which I think is a benefit versus some of the other lots that we would look over. Obviously, that we would have to think about a mitigation plan of where those cars would go, because as we drive through City Hall every day, that lot is really full. Yes, Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, as we discuss these properties, I don't know where we're going as far as a rating. I don't think this piece of property should be eliminated from consideration. I mean, it's been up for consideration in a variety of other discussions, police department, housing now, and who else knows what else. But I think that, you know, our purpose is to identify these properties, and I think it should stay in contention. It might not be highly ranked, but I think it should
Stay on the
should
list.
stay there.
I would agree with you.
Excuse me just for a second.
Oh.
I don't want to interrupt. I was just hoping you could turn the microphones up so
Okay.
my hearing's not so good.
We'll make sure if everyone can please.
Hey, John.
Hi, Richard.
This guy's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, just make sure, John, you pull that mic a little closer to you and just speak into the mic.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll just move on, and then at the end, we'll just kind of yay or nay if we want to keep properties on our recommendation list. Does that, yes, Jen?
Sorry, I might have either missed this
It's
or
okay.
not been listening fully. The purpose of our ranking is to go where?
Go to the city council for recommendation on lots for them to consider for repurposing for housing.
And is there a date certain on, like, is there a city? Okay, no, it's just,
No.
this is just like something we're
Yeah.
doing of our own volition to say, here's our recommendation.
Yep, so this is part of the list that identified the Sherburne School site from the Land Use Committee now well over 2 years ago. So this is dwindling down that list of sites to see what could be even more viable that this committee might want to recommend for municipal-owned land.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on, and we can always come back if there's anyone who wants to reference another one. So moving on to the next one, we have 25 Granite Street. It's approximately 3.9 acres, has access off Granite Street. If this is right near the Rite Aid on Woodbury and Maplewood. The current use of the site is recreational and contains a ball field. A small apartment building could possibly fit on the site while retaining the ball field, while a larger development could be built without retaining the ball field. There is a potential to acquire additional land to the east from the condo association that would create an opportunity for more housing and keep the ball field. There are wetlands on the adjacent parcel which extend an area of wetland buffer onto this lot. Utilities are easily accessible for connection. And there is no steep slope or other topographical constraints on this parcel. So we did, as a reminder, we did do a site walk on all of these sites.
Yeah, can you summarize? I wasn't able to get to this one. I
Yeah.
remember the others. What happened here?
So one of the, well, we kind of just walked through, but one of the big things that we noted that this, right there, that land is owned by the condo association, and so there was a conversation of if we wanted to not disrupt that ball field, of maybe looking into purchasing some of that land and connecting it with the part of the parcel that is not used for softball.
And I believe, if I'm correct here, that the condo association can't expand their buildings because of the wetland buffer. So that land is essentially useless to them.
It's like an eye.
But nobody's approached them yet?
It's on the other side of the.
It's on the other side of the wetland buffer,
where the
which is
condo
why
is.
it's more viable
I
to
know.
attach it to the
Yeah.
property that we're looking at.
I don't believe it's been
What's
approached.
the process for the city to acquire land like that? Is it the land use committee makes a recommendation to city council, or
Council would ultimately have to approve it
Yes.
for the expenditure of funds and
Yep.
purchase of land.
who like starts the negotiation though? How does it?
City manager.
City
City
manager,
manager ultimately would negotiate, but the council would have to approve it.
right.
I mean, I personally love that idea because it's. Sorry, Eric, are you raising your hand? Okay, because it expands the pie and doesn't take away from anything.
Eric and then John.
Yeah, you described it as 3.9 acres, but that 3.9 includes the softball field.
Correct. So
The city has invested a tremendous amount of money in creating that softball field to replace a softball field that was lost with the middle school expansion, right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Right. So I think the amount of money that the city has invested, and it's a beautiful field.
I agree with you.
It's a beautiful field. And I think it fulfills some of the recreational needs. So it's kind of when you discuss this piece of property, you have to put into consideration that it would probably require the city purchasing the condo association to make it a viable project.
Yeah, and that's in the notes that is in your, yeah.
Right. So from a scoring perspective, I personally wouldn't want to sacrifice that field,
Yeah.
and I think that's an important component to that particular parcel.
I agree with you. I think it's one of the more well-maintained fields that
Yep.
we see in the city.
Yeah, and I was going to say basically what Eric said, except for the fact is that, yeah, this field was developed, this is the old Wentworth Acres School, just for those who, and this property was developed as a softball field when the softball field was taken for the middle school. Just to put it in perspective, we looked at this property for the police station. What we were told at that point in time was that if the police station went on to that site, we would have to build into our budget about $1.5 million to build another softball field for the city to replace this one. So that's, just a little bit expanding on what Eric had to say.
Well, and to continue on the conversation of the softball field, if we were to purchase the extra land,
Right.
then keep the softball field. We've talked a lot here about diversity of housing, whereas the lower lot represents a perfect place for workforce housing, this represents a perfect neighborhood. And having a softball field in the neighborhood, especially if we were to partner with, say, a POA, where they could also put in some other community investments, sounds like a nice place to live.
And it's accessible, obviously, to, the stores in that area, et cetera. So, again.
To the highway.
Similar, a lot of, I'm sure everybody knows this, but I'll just say it again. Everything we talked about Commerce Way pretty much applies to this property because it's frankly the other side of Maplewood Avenue from Commerce Way. So,
Market Street, but yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
I really think this is one of those lots that if we could make a recommendation sooner rather than later to city council so that the staff could look into whether or not there's an ability to purchase some additional land to put sort of a little pocket neighborhood and still keep the softball field, I think it's a win-win.
Is that a motion?
If everybody's looking for that.
I would say this and then the lower lot are my two top priorities. I think there should be a balance between where we're building housing in the city and the type of housing. So I would always want these two to go hand in hand.
Okay.
So if that's a motion that we recommend this property to the city council in conjunction with looking into acquiring.
Right, I want it to be so that the softball field would remain and that we would acquire additional land adjacent to the property in which to be able to develop it for housing.
Why don't we, or if you're okay, why don't we wait until motions until the end so that it can be one motion brought forward to the council? Does that make, so that we're not making individual, or do we want to make individual motions per recommendation?
We can wait till the end and
Okay.
then make a decision then. Yeah,
Mine
that's
was
fine.
just a suggestion.
Yeah, perfect.
But I like, we turn suggestions into motions.
Any other comments on 25 Granite Street from the committee?
Beth, or maybe staff, do we know how much additional land there is outside of the wetland buffer?
The Heritage Hill condo card says there's 23 acres total, but.
It's not broken.
But we
out.
don't.
I'm
we
guessing
don't have like
approximately an
GS.
acre,
We haven't.
Yeah.
my guesstimate.
But
How
we
big
heard
is
an
the
acre was
softball
80
field?
units, right? During one of our last conversations?
Exactly. Acre to an acre and a half, you could possibly do that. But, I mean, it depends on what
Yeah,
you
sure.
do, but
Yeah, and I mean, this is, again,
ballparking looking at it.
anytime you're looking at the expenditure of funds to purchase, there's a whole bunch of things that could happen between a recommendation and an actual. The condo association could say no. They could say we would only want 10 units on there, and we could say, well, that doesn't work. They could be watching this conversation and could be much like the Foundry Place where the price goes up because they know it's wanted. There's a lot of conversations, but
They may also have a restriction in their condo docs.
they might have a restriction and say we could not. But this is part of if we sent it to the council and the council wanted to then authorize the city manager to and staff to investigate it a little bit more.
And if I can, the city being involved with a condo association with regards to city's needs and the condos need, this is not unique. This is what happened at Spinnaker.
Yeah.
Spinnaker.
a great example.
Spinnaker had the health facility. They couldn't, fund it themselves. They got into an arrangement with the city. So the city being involved with the condo association to help satisfy the needs of the city and the association is not a unique situation, so.
And for those who are skeptical of a housing trust fund, here's an example of how money could be used to benefit affordable housing.
Exactly. Okay. Next parcel is Falkland Way. This property is just under an acre and it's bisected by Bedford Way. This is right at the entry of Atlantic Heights after you cross the bridge. Well, I guess that is Atlantic Heights. A portion of this property may be suitable for development alone or in conjunction with the PHA, who owns the adjacent property and has additional square footage that could be combined with this development to develop more housing. This site would not be suitable for a large development, but the opportunity to create some housing is present. There is no wetland or utility, no wetlands and utilities are accessible. So you'll notice in the top left hand of the picture is housing. That's PHA-owned senior housing. So there's been a lot of conversation about this, and you'll see PHA, please correct me if I'm wrong, owns obviously to the top left outside of the box in blue.
Right.
So there's been conversation of this lot before to gauge the PHA's interest of maybe adding some more senior housing there, because that kind of fits in with the neighborhood. And again, there's already senior housing there as we talk about housing for all and all needs. John.
Am I correct that you're going to invite the PHA for our next meeting?
Yes.
I would suggest that this be a topic of conversation for that meeting. I mean, I don't see this as a viable standalone project. I could be wrong, and obviously others may have different opinions, but it doesn't appear to me to be a viable standalone project unless that's the only alternative. The better utilization of this small piece of land would be in conjunction with PHA, and I think it should be a topic
John,
of conversation.
talk into your microphone better, remember?
Okay. I think it would be an appropriate discussion for our next meeting.
And was this not the highly contentious walk
it
around?
was really tough.
Yeah, I
Very
recall
first
being
sidewalk.
grateful that I
Yeah.
was not at that meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really tough, and I think they made a lot of good points, and I hate to cave to NIMBYism, but I also want to respect the people who live there.
Well, it
who
wasn't
said-
just NIMBYism. They had community gardens there. They had,
Yeah.
Yeah, and they sort of said, this is a really dense neighborhood, and we rely on this green space for our open space for the whole neighborhood, and
I would
yeah.
further that, to think also about like the historical legacy of what that density looks like as opposed to some of the density elsewhere in town. So I don't think density is necessarily a reason not to, but the use of that green space, and then also like how that area has functioned within the city in the past, I think it's important to consider, especially from like for the market value of those homes is it a lower value because it's wonderfully affordable and built to sustain affordability, but something to also, I think, consider to meet the needs of those residents that are already there. I'm also concerned about putting forward both of the properties within this area to further,
Yeah.
because they're both really beautiful spaces, well used by the community.
I would be curious, though, to hear what PHA has to say about what the potential is for adding some senior housing without impacting that neighborhood too much.
Yeah, and seeing what type of green space could be left for those things. And again, I lived in the Heights for years, and it's a space that's utilized, could be potentially utilized a little bit more in conjunction with some of the housing.
Is it behind the house?
Yeah. Okay. Any more conversation on this? Okay. So then we'll look at the other one that is in Atlantic Heights. This property is about 2.6 acres and contains an existing sports field, walking trail, and woodlands on steep slopes. The ball field and existing trails are frequently used and are an amenity for the residents due to the steep slope shoreline buffer and site. The site is constrained and would likely be expensive to develop. I would personally say that this should be taken off. I think, just the cost of, if you've walked down there, it's very steep. So the cost of developing, I think it's going to be cost prohibitive. As said, this is highly used. That ball field is used all the time. It's, again, one of the ones that's very well maintained and very active use. But I would open it up for committee discussion.
I would agree. I mean, I think it would be a very difficult site to develop. I mean, with a lot of logistical issues that would probably tend away from anybody to either further develop it.
Yeah.
It's a nice piece of property, nothing better than have riverfront property, but I don't think it's developable.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for what we're looking at, this property, in my opinion, doesn't fit the bill. It's a beautiful piece of property. I mean, like Eric is saying, what would people pay to be on the river? But it's not for our purposes.
Any other discussion on this one? Yes.
Just as an additional point, I just hope that the city recognizes, it does recognize that it owns it, and whether there's any further purpose for development out of it from a recreational perspective or something.
Yeah, I mean,
it's used by the neighborhood. So.
Yeah, they're maintained recreational paths that the city came out and repairs the fences. It's maintained. There's a little playground there. It is.
And it's protected by a conservation easement. It's a part of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And
Yes.
grant funding. So you couldn't
Okay,
really do anything
good.
other than recreation or conservation with it.
Yeah.
And it's a great parcel for that. So any
That-
more amenities like that could be added.
That notation should probably be included in here,
Yeah.
because that's important.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that came out of when staff started doing more research on these properties. Okay, so we'll move on. Well, so that's all of them. That's kind of what we've dwindled the original list down to.
Do you want to talk about the other three that were
Yes,
okay.
yes. So we had requests by committee members to put in a couple other properties, one of them being 95 Mechanic Street, right?
Yep.
95 Mechanic Street. What is that one?
That's a great.
That's the,
Right next to the pump station.
Yes.
yes. But that's been reserved for expansion of the Mechanic Street Pump Station.
Yes,
They got to figure out where they're going to put it.
yes. So that is reserved right now for Mechanic Street Pump Station. Any conversation about that?
Works for me.
Okay. The next one is 195 Greenleaf Avenue. Right now, it's a recreational facility, and it was given to the city from the Coast Guard, am I correct? And it has deed, Councilor Moreau?
It's deed restricted. I believe it's recreation only is all that's allowed on that property. So, I mean, the lower half of that, I think we could actually do more recreation with that lot. I think there's stuff that could be done. Playgrounds, some other sort of recreation, maybe even an all-purpose field or something there, but I think that we are restricted on that lot otherwise.
1, 2, and 3.
Excuse me. Yeah, I had questions on that because, my first question was, is there a way to adjust the deed restrictions to allow affordable housing? That's still an open question, but the city staff did provide information that in addition to the deed restrictions, community development block grant funds were used on that site, and having been involved in a few of these things, if the purpose were changed to something that doesn't qualify for community development block grant, the city would have to repay those funds. And so that's another component of it anyways. If I can just ask staff, because I know you did the research, what was the money used for? Do you know?
I don't know. I just got the information from Elise.
Yeah.
I think
that they've had.
state park they put in there, they upgraded the athletic facility inside the building, the basketball courts.
Okay.
It said hundreds of thousands of dollars. So.
Okay, good. Thank you. So again, I appreciate staff looking into it because, we knew there was a deed restriction, but what else was there? And they found out what else was there. So anyways.
Dan?
Yeah, I'm gonna skip it.
Okay.
It's kind of changed my thinking.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with John. We found out some more information about it with the CBD, the grant fund issue. I don't think it should be eliminated. I think, nothing ventured, nothing gained type thing. We're looking for property. This piece of property has considerable amount of attributes for workforce housing. Its location, it has transportation, it has a variety of things. And I know when it was transferred, there was a deed, or it was limited to development of recreation. And I guess at that particular time, that probably made sense. But I think in the time that we're dealing with now, where we're looking for properties, and good properties, there's over 3 acres. I don't even know whether 3 point something acres there.
There is wetland buffer in that, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
On both the top and the bottom.
on both the top and the bottom, there's massive amounts of wetland, and then wetland buffer.
Right.
So I think buildable, there's probably,
Very little.
It's just where the building is.
yeah.
I would just think that it has some merit to investigate the deed restriction that's on there. I know that would be a little bit of an effort. I don't know whether it's whether it's the Coast Guard or the Department of Interior that you would formulate your request for consideration, but at least it would put that piece of property in contention for something in the future that it wasn't designated for when it originally transferred to the city. So I think there's merit with this property. I guess I understand now it's being leased to a church or some type of organization
It's a little blessed.
that's maintaining activity there.
Operation Blessing.
Operation Blessing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's probably something
Services.
contractual there, but, let's use it, let's use this discussion for something a little bit more futuristic to say that, at some time, some place, it might have more of a purpose for housing. And
Yeah.
if we don't investigate that now, like I said, nothing ventured, nothing gained. But I think a legitimate request to see that they would consider this piece of property for housing or that particular, or some other use beyond the deed restriction right now, I think it's worth the effort. It's nothing more than, some work to create the request, send it off, and see what type of answer you would receive on that.
Yeah, I would say in conjunction to that, though, we'd have to get a understanding on how much money would have to be paid back through the block grants that have been assessed to fund that. But my concern, and I think this is of merit, and so I just want to reiterate it, is the wetland. So when we're looking at this picture, the only buildable area of that 3+ acres is exactly where that building stands, which I think has a square footage of like 2,100 square. It's not a big building when you are actually in it. So just for the committee, I just want to reiterate that as you can see on the screen, where the blue lines are is where the wetland buffer goes to.
Yeah, can I just add?
Yes, please.
I would just add that it does provide a significant recreational resource to the people who live across the street, and it's in a really challenging part of town in terms of walking or biking anywhere. So to add more people, but not any other recreational amenities, I think is something to consider.
And
There is public transportation from that within a very short distance from that.
Yes. I will say, though, that it does serve as a community hub and recreational facility for a lot of our disadvantaged residents currently, especially with its use by Operation Blessing. So my concern would be that we would be removing a staple of services for what could potentially be this housing.
I don't even know if it was to develop. We'd have to first overcome the restriction.
Yeah, well, the restriction and the payback. So I want to make sure that we're aware that it would be the two things. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars and then
After the
potentially that.
restriction if the restriction could be removed, then there would be a possibility of incorporating a similar community, area within a housing project. So that's creativity after that.
Yeah.
But you have to first overcome the deed restriction. And if there's any creative thought after that to see how you could accomplish both a housing and a recreational, some type of recreational service that's being performed there now, that's creative thinking.
Just a question for staff, and then I'll go to John. Have we dealt with changing deed restrictions with any land given, or Beth, if you know about this, any land that has been from the federal government? I know that we were not able to change any of the restrictions when we were looking at the McIntyre. So I'm just wondering if staff has any knowledge or experience with getting the federal government to change a deed restriction.
I know that it's often written in that if you remove like a conservation piece on Sagamore Creek, the Sagamore Headlands property behind Seacoast Mental Health, that it's written right into the language from NOAA that if you take this out of recreation, you got to pay the full value of the property back, and it's a waterfront property on Sagamore Creek, so
Yeah.
it will be huge. And that's often the case, that you have to replace the value. So I would imagine that would be the same here. The value would have to be replaced not of the money that's been spent by CDBG, which is a separate pool of federal money, but the money that was used to acquire the property. So the acquisition cost and the amenities that were added through another grant program would be added to that. So
Okay.
Was there an acquisition cost?
I don't know. Was it?
But you'd have to
was
pay
it
the
a
value of the
donation?
property.
It might be the
today.
current value. We'd have to look at what this says, but it could be the current value, or it could be the donation value. I don't know.
John?
Another question.
Just to help your discussion.
And then we'll come back here.
I just did a quick search on this, on the assessment. The building itself is 7,000 square feet.
Oh, 7, okay.
Yeah, so, anyway, that's all.
Mr. Anderson?
No, I just, while we're on this particular subject, just to see whether whether this property has any potential in the future to be, have that consideration for what we're here for, some type of housing. And personally, I feel it's worth the inquiry. It might dead end someplace down the road, but if you don't ask, you don't know. So I think the question's relatively simple, that we should pursue some type of inquiry to see where this potential could, finally lead. We might find a roadblock down the road, but at least we're going to have to remove those roadblocks one piece at a time.
Mr. Euler?
I think we've had this discussion, staff has heard it. At the end of the day, when it comes to acquiring or disposing of property, it falls to the city manager. If the city manager feels that this is something worth pursuing, they don't need anything from us for her to go forward. So I would leave it with staff and the manager to make a decision as far as how they feel, if they feel that they should go forward.
Would that be respectable? Would that be a question to the city manager or to the city council where our recommendations go?
Well, so it could go to the city council, and then if that. But so what I would recommend, Mr. Anderson, if you feel strongly about this property, is when we go to make our motions at the end of the discussion, that you can make a motion as it regards to this.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm learning how to be a chair on the fly. Okay, and then we have 305 Greenland Road. So if we could just. So this is, as many will see at the front parcel, the new skate park. The back parcel that abuts near DPW also is being used right now as a set down. My understanding, though, is that once that's done, what has always been in the place for this is recreational space, a field, and there's also connection to the rail trail. So that has been. Part of this project from the start is that I believe it's right now half a soccer field or half-size soccer field will be in that part of the parcel kind of near where you see the letter M, taking over the remainder of that parcel for recreation. Yes.
I am having fun poking around on MapGeo and wondering about the 16 acres that's in the corner that is also municipally owned at the end of Harvard Street.
I can
Take it
talk
away.
about that. There is a giant well for the city of Portsmouth that's on that land that makes
well?
it. One of our
Collins well?
one of our wells that gives our drinking water on top of the other drinking water sources. So yes, we did look at that, and it was going to be extremely difficult based off of the narrowness of where you could actually build based off of the radius of the well and the.
Shucks.
Sorry.
It's a great walk, though.
I thought the same thing when I saw it. And got very upset when I found out, really? It's not going to work?
That's what you call institutional knowledge.
We like our wells. So I would open it up for discussion. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Just to talk about the property that we are talking about, not across the way. There was also concerns brought up, I know, and I can't remember what meeting I remember hearing this at, but from some of the neighbors regarding stuff that may have been dumped on this lot, because it was a stump dump for many years, and they were concerned about things that might have been buried there. So using it for recreation is a little bit safer than trying to put people living there. So.
Right next to the well, huh?
Right next to the well, yep.
Cool.
Thought the same thing.
You should see what they used to dump in the ocean.
So just to take that into consideration as
Sure,
well, I
Anderson?
think is why we went towards recreation.
Again, if I drive by this property, on my way home, 10 times a day. already,
Same.
I just look at it, and I've always questioned that, there has been an arrangement with the city and Severino with regards to city construction projects, and maybe it might have saved the city some money. But I think that's been going on for over 5 years. And I think there's more value to this property than to have it as a laydown for.
Yeah,
There is, and it's projected that it would be.
Yeah.
We sacrificed a considerable amount of property at Sherburne, which was a recreational, which had a recreational component of it, and we sacrificed that for housing. So I don't know that there is an equal type of thought there. I think it has potential for housing. I wouldn't, anything that's going to be put there from a recreational consideration isn't going to be a full field. It's going to be kind of a half a field here, or potentially half a field of something. So it's not going to be a full recreational facility. But I just think it's a piece of city property. I think it's an obligation of this committee to recognize every, type of property that has potential and score it in some type of, fashion or manner. I mean, we did that with Sherburne. We made a sacrifice from a recreational perspective, and it was probably rightfully so. And I don't think that, as we try and, gauge these things, what's the better value? We surely recognize that housing is a strong value, is a strong consideration, and how we weigh that against housing or recreational, whatever other, applicable use is something that we should, consider.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, one of the conversations that we had, myself as a pledge I made as a counselor, was that in removing and reusing that softball field, that we pledged to make sure there was another softball field, and that is coming to fruition. And so, again, I would have to say and have that same stance that if we were looking at removing what would be a recreational facility, that we would have to then look at where we could replace and put this, whether it's a partial field, half field, playground, whatever, or anything of sense of where in the city that we would be able to replace that. And so that would just be my viewpoint, that if we were going to remove this from its recreational intent, I would look to this committee to offer up suggestions that we could bring to the council of where we could move that recreational facilities. John, and then we can come back, Mr. Anderson.
I have a couple of things. I want to jump around a little bit. One is that, isn't this supposed to be one of the access points for the rail trail?
Rail trail.
It is.
And
It
you've
is.
got that one there, but there's also the one on Banfield that's also supposed to be accessed. So, I mean, if this were the only access, I'd be more concerned about it, but you do have Banfield, which is not that far away. Second thing I just want to talk about a little bit, and you mentioned, Joe, about motions and going to the council. Can I just ask a question? I'm getting back to this point, but at the last meeting, we voted to take some action with regards to POA. Was that ever communicated? How was that taken forward? Did that go forward to the council? Did that... the motion
I think it was a motion to suggest that Karen be or the city manager be in charge of selecting the next developer.
What happened to that motion?
It was discussed at the last council meeting that.
Oh, it was? Okay.
Yeah, it was discussed under Councillor Taylor's motion of the updates of the establishment and the funding of our housing trust, and that this committee brought forward a recommendation that the city manager look through the pre-qualified applications for housing, if I'm remembering this correctly, the pre-qualified, look at the list from the RFQ and RFP and consider that pre-qualified developers for any future project.
I'm fine with that, but I just want to pick up on what I believe Jen said at the last meeting, which kind of may tie into this. When you made that motion, one of the things that I got out of it, whether you intended it or not, is that if we bring, let's just say, if we bring POA on board, they may help us look at sites and make a determination what would be a good site and that type of thing. I believe that was part of
Yes,
what
that
you
was
were
part of
saying.
it.
I see this as the same type of thing. And the fact is that this is a piece of property, and we're talking about how, limited it is, et cetera. If we had somebody who knows what they're doing on board, they may say, yeah, we can use that site, and this is how it is. So I think this all kind of ties together. It all ties together, looking at sites and looking at people to work with. And yes, we can make recommendations, and yes, the council, can certainly act on those recommendations. But before anything gets done, it would be nice to have somebody who works in this area look at the sites and provide some input. So again,
I will say of note, and we can try to go back through the record and look, on the land use committee for that exact purpose was PHA Director Welch, who, when we were going through these, there was the conversation of, as a developer, how would you approach some of these sites, which is, some people may remember originally, when we just looked at city-owned parcels, there was like 100 and something. Then we brought it down to 15, and then we started having conversations of, do we actually feel as a developer that this site would be able to be developed? And so that's where we got down to that other list. Notions that, things like this were earmarked for the skate park, therefore not looked at because they had a full recreational plan for that area. One of the reasons, too, was the understanding that we were taking away green space from the Sherburne community and through the rail trail and from the short walk. This space is a short walk for that neighborhood. Also, so that neighborhood, the neighborhoods in between that this is, and the neighborhoods going off of Lafayette and Beverly Hill Road. Lafayette, Islington. Wrong end. Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I would agree with John, and I was at that meeting, and Jen started it with the fact that, maybe the city should have some obligation to, or from a priority perspective, is to request to POA whether they would come in and do that type of assessment from their perspective. And then I think the discussion developed a little bit, beyond that, in for a recommendation, because we only provide suggestions or recommendations for the city council to consider. But that's where I thought there was some merit. Whether POA would want to come in or not, that's another question to be answered, for them to make some assessment from maybe different from ours. And so I think that's, I think John makes a good suggestion to see if that's still there, and I thought that would be at the discretion of the city manager to ask POA, would you consider being a consultant to these pieces of property? That's where I thought the motion began and ended. It seemed to go beyond that, which I think is another discussion in itself. But I think, as we try and score these properties from our perspective, whether there should be the ability for somebody else to take a look at it from a different, 180 degrees different from where we look at it. And I would support that. But
So maybe it's
if we, but I think the way that motion ended up, I don't understand it particularly. I think we never really saw it in a beginning and an ending, position. But I just raised some questions whether the recommendation that would come out of this committee was consistent with its intent to the city council. It's up to the city council to measure it after that, whether it complied with some of with an RSA, a state statute that eliminated some public process. But I'm wondering. I thought that's a separate discussion. We've kind of wandered away from where we were, and I think there is some consideration for the city council to proceed on a process basis with any development, any future development, to make sure it stands consistent with the RSAs of the state. That's all. And we don't abbreviate it in any way.
I guess I'm confused on, and we had an email exchange. I guess I'm confused on where you feel that any motion of a recommendation from this committee would be faltering on. I think it was like RSA 7414.
41.
Or 4114.
It just established. I've got it here. I've read it a couple times. It just establishes some pretty consistent public process.
Could you pinpoint where you think that there's a potential
right here
conflict?
now,
I guess that's what I'm asking. I'm trying to. And this was my question to you in our email, was if you could pinpoint where your concern is so that we could touch base with legal to make sure So that's what I'm asking again, is if we could get a pinpoint of where you are worried about the conflict so that we can address that with legal, and then come back to this committee and say, hey, this would be a better appropriate route for a motion or recommendation, or we feel that this is still falls under protection of the RSA because the city council and the city manager with permission from the city council is within her role to process any disposal or acquisition of land. Yes.
And I think that, at the end of the day, we're making recommendations to the city manager. If there is something that we recommend that's not in compliance, she's not going to do it. I mean, that's the end of the, so, I mean, really if there is a concern, I think that on something that we do, we don't have the final say anyways, so let the manager make the decision as far as what needs to be done to keep in compliance with the law.
Okay. Any other discussion on this site? Okay, and so I think if we scroll down on this, we have the information on the deed restriction also. So that was included as an addition to
Thank you for that.
your packet.
Very helpful.
Okay. So I guess I would open the floor up for more discussion or any motions that any committee members would like to make as regards to the 7 or so properties we just looked at.
I'm getting motion from Member Leary that he'd like me to say something. I could make a motion that this committee recommends to City Council that they investigate and explore options, 1 at the City Hall lower lot and 2 at 25 Granite Street, and for more housing, but specific to the 25 Granite Street, if they were able to actually acquire more land from the neighbor condo association in which to combine with that so that the softball field would remain.
Okay. Second for that motion, and then we'll discuss. Second by Mr. O'Leary, in discussion.
Yeah, I would move to separate the two, the City Hall and the 25 Granite. Yeah, that would be.
That'd be
Second,
fine
it's
with
just
that.
simply for the sake of the sentences you would have to write.
Right. Yeah, and I agree. It's hard. I mean, we feel
Valiant effort.
right. We feel that the City Hall lower lot is truly a doable and worth further investigation as to what it would take and whether or not it's affordable to create affordable housing. And then separately would be the 25 Granite Street, whether or not the softball field can remain and we can acquire enough additional neighbor land to really do some sort of reasonable size neighborhood development.
Okay. And that was a friendly amendment accepted?
And I'll accept it to split them if that's.
Okay.
Yes.
So I would, yes, Mr. Anderson?
No, go ahead, finish, and I would just, I'll make my comment.
No, make your comment. I was going to call the motion, so.
I don't know if it requires an amendment, but I believe, and I've tried to express it here, that Greenleaf should have some consideration
Yeah,
with further investigation.
You can make that motion after. This is,
just
Councilman
these
Monroe's
two.
just making a motion about those two, and then anyone can make a motion about the other properties.
Okay,
Yes.
all right, fair.
Okay.
And do you need 2 votes since we separated?
Correct, yep.
would think.
So I would look for a motion on look for a vote on the motion, the first motion of the lower lot. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
I'm gonna be opposed.
It's okay. One opposed? And looking for a vote on the second motion.
Can I make a comment on the second one?
Yes, you can.
Just a point. In the discussions we've had here, we've talked about the city acquiring additional land, et cetera. I would say that certainly during the negotiation process, the staff has the opportunity to either have the city pick up that cost for the council, or that is something that can be negotiated with the developer as far as who picks up that cost. So, and again, that's just a comment.
And this is, again, just a recommendation to the city council to see if they have interest in sending this to the staff to look more into this property.
Correct.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, those are those two properties. Now, Mr. Anderson, do you have a motion
Yeah, I would
for?
like to consider a motion for including the investigation for the Greenleaf property with the city investigating a change in the deed restriction at this, solely on that, okay? And some type of advisement if the city is going to pursue a consultant like POA for properties to rank, to consider the Greenland Road property.
Okay.
Greenleaf.
Greenleaf. Hold on.
Greenleaf
Okay.
and Greenleaf.
Okay. Hold. So what is your first motion? So is your first motion about? I just want to make sure that we're clear for the record. So the first motion is about the
Greenleaf.
Greenleaf to
Investigate
Invest-
195 Greenleaf to change the deed restriction.
okay. So that is the first motion.
Yes.
For
Investigate.
discussion.
Okay. So we have a second for that. And
I don't
any.
know whether I would include it in addition to this motion for consideration for the Greenland Road property.
I think
Or should we leave it as?
I would leave it standalone, since it has a different set of metrics to look at with the deed restriction. That would, especially because we just separated the other two. I would just, if you're okay with that, that would be my. Okay, so we have a second, and then we'd be looking for discussion.
So this is the one that we would have to return the property value to the person who, or the
Plus grant
That's
funds.
not in consideration for this moment. This motion only.
But
addresses- this only-
that does
this motion-
apply to this property that we're discussing.
It might apply to it, but
Might.
this motion.
That's what I'm asking.
Specifically to request an investigation on the deed restriction.
So I guess based on comments, I would look to make a friendly motion to include investigation on returning CBD or community block grant funding that has been spent on this property, because I.
Yeah, but we can't proceed until we have the deed.
Well, you cannot accept my amendment. That's my amendment to your.
Seconded, and if we're asking them to investigate, why can't we couple the two together? Why does it have to be just the deed and then the returning of the CBD funds? CBD, probably not the right name.
Just in regards to the previous motion that we might want to have the developer pay for the cost of that property, and maybe we might want the developer to pay for the cost of any CBG money.
So you presume that
There's a variety of ways to investigate this thing one at a time. I think right now, the first.
But I disagree in that you can uncouple these two considerations. A developer would certainly want to know if they were going to have to repay funds, if they were considering the effort it would take to discuss lifting the deed restrictions.
But the deed restriction would come first. The other issue is.
But why waste their time?
The other issue, the way I see it, is the deed restriction would come first. The second consideration would be any reimbursement of the grant funding.
I think the question from the committee member is why would we not investigate both at the same time if we're already expending staff resources to look into them, instead of a delay of, we'll look at this, we may hear back in a month from the federal government, we may hear back in 6 months from the federal government. Why would we wait on an investigation of any repayment of any community development block grants until we hear back, if we can do it concurrently? Am I correct in summarizing
much more eloquently than I
I
did.
understand your concern, I believe, but I don't want one to complicate the other in this motion.
My point is that they are like so married together that one does complicate the other.
Just a point of clarification from the chair, and this could end part of this discussion. Mr. Anderson, do you accept or decline my friendly amendment? Because if you decline it, then there's no need for further discussion of whether they should be coupled together or not.
I guess my belief would be to decline it.
Okay.
This particular mo-
Okay, so we will,
Motion.
yep, so we will call the motion for, can you repeat the motion, the original?
To investigate the 195 Greenleaf property to change the deed restriction.
Okay. Calling the motion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Nay?
Okay.
Nay. Okay, the nays have it 4-2. Is there now a motion, Mr. Anderson, for the Greenland Road? Or do you want to make another motion on 195?
Yeah, to see if it passes, I'd make another motion to consider investigating the deed restriction and the CBG, any consequences of the grant funding.
Okay. Second?
Second.
Mr. O'Leary? Any conversation? Yes.
Although I find this probably a waste of time for staff, if it was narrow to the point of just what would it take to overcome, so it seems like a slightly simpler investigation, then I might be in favor of it.
So not a conclusive answer, but is this possible?
Is it possible, and what would it take to do so?
Okay.
If I can, I see this as a recommendation to staff and the city manager. If they say it's going to take too much effort, they can come back and tell us that. So I agree with you completely, and I think that option is available based on the motion as it's made.
Okay. No other discussion?
I do have one question for
Yes.
discussion. Eric, you seem very passionate about this parcel. And I'm
think
curious
it's-
as to
I
why.
think it's our obligation to recognize city property, and that's what we're doing. As a suggestion, we don't get into the other issues that have been discussed here are legitimate, but I think it's our purpose to recognize city property, and that's all I'm trying to do. In some way, shape, or manner that helps our particular cause for housing.
Okay.
I think it's important too. Honestly, it's just if the federal government weren't involved, I'd feel differently. It just feels like if we're going to prioritize staff time, it seems like a real long shot for this because of the restrictions and how that they work and all of the money. And I would say some of the operational challenges in the government, perhaps for getting answers back quickly right now. I think I would rather have my time spent, or I would rather, if I were to utilize staff time, I'd rather have them, have someone figure out how we can use that property on Richards Ave for affordable housing. The tax lien one or whatever. I feel like that almost has a faster, stronger output.
And Mike, go ahead, and then I'll make a comment.
I hear what you're saying. I've been involved with it before. We were involved with Pease in getting the refuge energy plant turned over to the city from the Air Force. It can take time, or it can be quick. But I think at this point in time, as Beth mentioned, that is a concern with regards to how much staff time gets in. But I think that's the manager's decision. If she feels that the effort isn't worth it, then she'll tell us that, and we'll move on. But I think that, frankly, writing a letter, if that's the beginning process. The other thing is, it depends on who, a lot of this stuff is depending on who's representing us in Washington. I mean, I will tell you that the refuge energy plant get turned over to the city based on Warren Rudman. He talked to the Air Force and they turned it over. And so it can be a long process, but it can be a quick process. And if it's going to take too much effort, I would expect the manager would notify us, and we'll put it to bed at that point in time.
I am not going to, this may be contentious, I'm not going to support the motion for this property. I think it is an asset to that area right now, and it serves a very in need clientele, and I think that there has been a lot of energy and money, not only from city through grants, but through organizations like the Elks and Operations Blessing to really make that space, again, an asset for those individuals. I also think when we look at where we are placing housing, I think we need to make sure that we are conscious of where we are placing housing and not creating an area that can be deemed as a negative of, I'm going to say the word like a ghetto or a projects area where we have some at-risk and underserved community members that are already in that area, where we already have the shelters. And, you know, again, that recreational facility has a lot of use for our underserved and maybe some unhoused people in our community. And I really think that we have a couple other properties to dive into before we look at starting to remove that asset from the community. I think there's a big difference also between outdoor seasonal recreation and indoor year-round recreation. And I think it's very important that, again, when we looked at our matrix, when we were looking through things, we had community impact, green space impact, recreational impact, existing demographic impact, existing residential impact. And I think that this serves a very important purpose that none of the other sites we looked at have, which is year-round indoor recreational facility that supports a huge demographic. And so I will not be supporting bringing this plot of this piece of property any further in this process. And depending how this motion goes, I will be making a motion to remove this property from consideration. So I would look to call the motion. Do we need a reminder of the motion, or we all feel okay?
I think we're okay.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
2 ayes. Opposed? The opposed have it. I would look to make a motion to remove 195 Greenleaf Avenue from any recommendations going forward to the City Council for redevelopment of this site.
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion?
What does removing it do relative to like the other sites that we were considering, the field on the hill, for example?
What field?
Like the Atlantic Heights.
Well, so we haven't gone back to that, and that could be a motion if somebody would like to remove that from the list of consideration for recommendations.
For this committee going forward.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So again, that does not stop the city council from on their own bringing this forward. It does not stop another board from bringing it forward. It's removing it from our conversation. What I don't want is for us to get held up, as we have been a little bit in the last year plus on certain topics. So I'm removing this. I'm making this motion to remove this discussion.
You're not removing anything.
No.
You're making a motion.
I'm making a motion to remove this property from this committee's discussion on redevelopment for housing. Okay. Call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So wait, what was that? Can we?
I'm abstaining. I guess I'm
Okay.
just confused, so I'm going to just abstain.
Yeah. Well, I'll call it one more time. All in favor? Aye.
It's 5 to 1 to 1.
Okay.
Two.
Yeah.
2.
There's 2 against.
2 against? Okay.
2 against.
4 to 2 to 1.
4 to 2 and 1. Okay. And, okay, so now, again, we're open for any motions for any of these properties. So if anyone is,
Let's move.
Eric, didn't you have one for the skate park?
There was one, there was the
Greenland?
Greenland.
Road.
yes, that's what I asked earlier, if you had another
I
motion for
I
that.
would make a recommendation to consider this piece of property in some fashion for housing.
How many acres is it other than the park, though? The skate park?
You mean,
And you're not talking about the skate park, right? Just the area above the skate
Behind
park?
it.
Right,
Yeah.
the last.
Oh, wow. I didn't think the answer would be like this.
I know,
When it works, it's great.
when it works.
Right.
The
'Cause you have
total
to
parcel
draw
is
the area in there.
4.9.
Oh,
So
okay.
maybe
It's
like
probably a couple,
Yeah.
but it's a strange pie
Yeah.
shape, so
Basically.
that does have an effect on building.
It could be a
mean,
proposed.
It's just over an acre.
Just for a point of clarity,
Yes,
we're going through an exercise right now
yes,
where we're ranking
yes.
the parcels that we think are most viable.
We're essentially trying to dwindle down this list so we can send it to city council so that they can decide where they would like staff resources to go.
I'm not calling for a motion,
Yes.
but from a pragmatic sense, it makes let's focus on the ones that have risen to the top and leave the rest for discussion later.
Yeah.
We do not need to break down every single parcel. Once we've achieved some success of getting more housing in the pipeline, then we can move to other properties. That's why I voted to not take it off of the table for discussion of the other parcel. But this seems like spinning our wheels and wasting time when we know we have some clear front runners. We've made motions to recommend them. Let's settle it there and return to this later. Like, this committee isn't being disbanded tomorrow.
My purpose was to make the motion is just to even recognize the property. This is the first discussion of any fashion on this particular property. So I'd like to leave it in the running for consideration.
Yes,
for something.
certainly, and I'm not against you leaving it in the running at all. I think, but you are someone who, in the past and even here, has recommended ranking these properties, and inherently, a property that has a deed restriction and has a funding component that could complicate it puts obstacles in the way, naturally lowers it down the ranking system. I'm not saying the discussion is not worthwhile. I'm saying it's not worthwhile now.
And I recognize that. I just think that this piece of property has a better value for a housing consideration than maybe a half-baked recreational application.
Sure, I think the assistant mayor made a pretty compelling case for reasons why it might not. But we're wasting our time and not talking about the properties that are much more viable for
For the
consideration.
properties we are ready to send forward to the council. We are not ready to send,
At that particular time, we have two, right?
I think so, yeah. We have two right now.
In the discussion we have now. I don't think another piece of property really underscores our intent. It just makes some recognition of, oh, we didn't really look at this property at all before this and just leave it.
I would just argue it makes the committee inefficient.
Hold
We're being inefficient.
for one moment, please, Mr. Anderson. Is your motion clarification? Is your motion to send this piece of property to council or to keep it within this committee for further discussion? Because I think that makes a difference of what we do right now.
That's what I'm asking.
I'd say leave it in consideration to go forward to the council for just recognition.
Okay, so-
Maybe that might doom its vote here.
Okay, are you okay if we call the vote, or would you?
Megan makes a very, compelling point, but is it the position of the chair, who else can I ask, that only the ones that are that we had on the original agenda are under consideration, or is every piece of property under consideration?
It is the opinion of the chair that through the last 3.5 years of due diligence between city staff and other land use boards and other committees within the city, the properties have been recognized and dwindled down to the original ones that were in the packet.
Okay.
These other properties were by request of committee members to be presented, but it is the recognition of the chair that the best properties to be moved forward are the ones that have already been
Sidewalked.
Vetted.
site walked and vetted through land use, through staff, and was presented to this committee.
So if I can, if Mr. Anderson's idea is that Greenland Road be included with these, and as Dagnan said, if it's included in there, then it's not being treated any differently. The only ones that are being treated differently are the ones that are being sent to the council. Is that fair?
Yes, which is my point of clarification for Mr. Anderson was, are you looking to keep this piece of parcel in committee to look at maybe scheduling a site walk the way we have with these other and vet it more? Or are you looking to skip those steps that we did for these other properties and bring it directly to council? I think that is a point of clarification the committees would like.
I'd say bring it to council now. That might,
Okay, then we're going to call the vote.
okay,
That's fine.
fine.
Did somebody second it?
Yes, John did.
Mr. O'Leary second. Did you second that, right?
Probably.
You second everything.
Seconds everything.
We can count on you for that one.
Sounds like something you do.
Okay, we will call the vote for this. All in favor?
All right.
One aye. Noes? Okay, the noes have it. Okay, we are going to move on from.
Does that eliminate this?
That just,
No,
that
it
just
just
doesn't
doesn't send it to council.
Okay, so it just keeps it,
Yeah.
it just
Yep, and we can
viable.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct. And if this committee would like, what I can do is ask for staff to give maybe a report back at our next meeting for the intended city uses of that space for now. I know that there's, after discussion with the city manager, there's of the Greenland Road. Yes.
Yeah.
So maybe, just an update. Okay. Thank you very much for that. We are going to roll pretty quickly. As everyone knows, we got in the matrix that we've all gone over for what the committee work that we discussed in the beginning. Now it feels like crazy to say like a year and a half ago. And then we all committee members received, Councillor Tabor kind of put together a short list of some of the things that the council could look at. It was a short list. It was just, he's not here. And kind of some of the objectives and actions. The question for this committee right now is going over our original matrix, if there's anything that would like to be removed or add. Yes.
I feel like what's missing from this is talking about zoning to convert maybe existing zones that don't allow housing to allow them.
Okay.
Much like the GNOD.
Yes. This, again, and I can hand this out if you'd like one from the crowd. This is essentially summarizing some of the things. We have a bigger matrix of, 50 or 60 things that the committee would like to go over and impact level. This is summarizing some of of those goals with current projects or soon to be looked at projects in ways that they could be summarized and more attainable. So example is increase the dollars available in the housing. Action item is increase the dollars available in the Affordable Housing Trust. The goal or the objectives are pay in lieu options, which the City Council just voted based on the recommendation of this committee for payment of lieu based on our RKG study. Convert unused city property to housing, look at parking constraints, simulate more housing density by removing parking minimums, co-living, review planning board draft policy and advise city council on what recommended actions to take, greater density in neighborhoods through gentle zoning amendments where we could look at, and then transportation.
Co-living will be before planning board next week
Okay.
for a possible recommendation.
When you
to
say
City Council.
would be, do you mean it is?
It's going to be on the agenda for a possible recommendation to City Council. That's the anticipation
And a project in the GNOD is coming for preliminary conceptual
next week.
next week.
I guess my point was, should we look at other zones?
Sort of like when I expanded Gateway.
Yes.
Sort of like that?
Well, and also, sorry. I think other zoning considerations too, like that low-hanging fruit that we can change. That was a big point of conversation early on in this committee, not to mention all of the bills that are at the state level right now addressing zoning. It seems like a prime time to kind of be capitalizing on that. So I don't know how to wordsmith that, but a motion to consider... Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, would this committee like me to ask Attorney Jane Farini for a list of, or a small breakdown of some of the zoning bills that the city is watching? I don't necessarily need to ask her to be here unless the committee
just write a summary
would like her
for us.
to, but I can ask her to write a summary.
Send links, whatever.
Yep. Okay. Okay. I will.
Summaries.
I kind of have it right here, actually.
Yes. Okay. Do you want to share
They
some?
want to expand ADU
Yep.
possibilities. They want to, I think, prevent arbitrary minimum lot sizes.
Yes.
And then they also want to allow more residential and commercial zones. So that
Yes.
seems like a lot of things that would be applicable to Portsmouth.
Yes. So there's sometimes things that we think that we will support that, and this is why I asked for a summarization from Attorney Farini, because sometimes some of these bills that seem like we would support also erode local control because they become statewide, and so that's why I would look to her to give a summary of kind of at this point where the city's stance on some of these bills. And if I know, especially the minimum lot size, there has been no legislative subcommittee convened to talk about that yet, because I emailed her the other day and said, hey, what's our stance on this? And we, as a municipality, technically don't have a stance now until the legislative subcommittee meets. But I will, for the next committee, because there are some other bills, I will ask her for a summary.
Yeah, that'd be super helpful.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. I guess what I would look for the next meeting, as we know this, Howard did a great job, but this is a very big matrix, is that if we could go through and if people could pick one or two things that then now we want to really focus on as we are sending off the municipal owned property to the council, we are going to now move on again to other things that this committee is looking at. We have crossed a couple great things off. We established the housing trust. We've gotten that fund. We've supported the GNOD. Again, that a conceptual plan is coming forward with that. We've recommended land for possible affordable housing and municipal. And so now I think zoning should be the next thing we really look at tackling. So if, again, committee members over the next week or so can send over their ideas for the next discussions so that we can get with staff and start looking at what ordinances that we would like to potentially trim down or adjust within our zoning. Does that sound like a good?
Good.
Okay, so we will open up for public discussion. Please come, say your name. Please keep a minute and a half in your heart.
Yeah, you'll keep it quick. Gerald Duffy, 428 Pleasant Street.
Into the mic,
I had a number of things to say, but I'll just address one. I've been following the co-living zoning change, the proposal, and my understanding is, and please correct me, planners and Beth, if I got any of this mixed up, but I think right now we're at the stage where we have a draft ordinance that will be discussed and approved by the planning board, and it's fabulous. It's an innovative project. I watched the last planning board meeting, and people pointed out this isn't just for service workers. This could also be for seniors who are on their own. It could be for people in transition, people who are divorced, or just in transition need short-term housing. So it's a great idea. The problem is that right now it's only assigned to the downtown area. And one of the things you've got in your very long spreadsheet, the worksheet, is so if I can just quote it to you here. It's allow co-housing, congregate living everywhere, right? Cite successful examples in other cities. Well, I think that's what you should do. You should do it everywhere. The argument against that is, well, we don't know how it's going to work out, so let's wait and see after this Congress Street project works. Well, that could be 4 years before you know whether it's going to work or not. And I think that there's a bit of nervousness about that, but I think these are kind of the times where you take a little risk, and this could produce hundreds of similar units of housing in the next 5 years. So you're looking at either, if you go with the draft as it is right now, you're looking at about 82 authorized units. If you take the other approach and make it available everywhere, you may be looking at hundreds of units in the next few years. So I would advise if you can put your thumb on the scale, which I think is part of the job of this committee, that would be a very good thing to do in the coming days. So that's it.
Thank you.
Pete Trahuda, 280 South Street. So I'm going to bring up something that happened yesterday that deeply affects this committee and affects basically everybody in the country, but how it affects this committee is Sherburne and the funding from PHA. I don't know if anybody heard, but our not-so-friendly people in D.C. have eliminated the Affordable Housing Trust. Billions of dollars gone and shuttered. Now, the PHA funding was supposed to come from that. So my question to you as a committee is, can we get the status on what's happening with that? I mean, it's on your list. We need to look at more affordable housing funds. This is a big issue on this, and my question to this committee is, how are you going to advise the council on what to do here? PHA was selected, and their funding was based on these funds, I do believe. And the thing to note here that, this committee recommended PHA, and so did the council. But in the meetings that were discussed afterwards, when the community did meet, I personally asked Mr. Welch if there was a plan B if the funding didn't come through, and he said no. So to me, that means the Sherburne School and the other projects that he's involved in are a no-go. So at this point in time, I don't know what the status of if there's contracts, if there's anything else that has been signed. But if you do invite Mr. Welch in next week, I think it's very important to find out how this has affected the PHA funding and if this project is going to move forward. Now, I remember in POA, they had outside funding. They were not dependent upon either the federal government or the city for funding. So that would be my first question and comment. My second one is, I've looked at, I didn't have your little sheet, but I did look at the big one, and I went through it. And some things for you to remember, especially with establishing funds and going for other housing, is, John, anytime you spend any money that is not appropriated, you go through the city council. The city manager only has the authority that the city council gives her. She cannot go through and make any adjustments to that until they say she can. So, I mean, that's one of the first things, because it wasn't clear to me, like it wasn't clear to a lot of people, that the motion that was moving forward last time to have the city manager follow the same process. First of all, that is not in the charter, and it's not in an RSA, as Mr. Anderson says. The second thing is it eliminates competitive bidding if you select, or as you referred to, POA. This is government funds. This has to go to competitive bid. It doesn't matter if the process worked. All the projects are different, and they have to go through competitive bid per the state RSAs. So that's something else for you to consider. Anyway, those are my comments, and I look forward to the discussion on the rest of the stuff. Thank you.
Any more speakers? Just please make sure to state your name for the record and speak into the mic.
Alice Wall, I live on Woodbury Ave. I'm concerned about this co-living, first of all, I don't really know. I guess what that is a dormitory roommate situation. So co-living is vague. Families are co-livers, anybody who lives together is co-living. So I think it's a dormitory roommate situation. And it doesn't seem to me that it's affordable housing for seniors or couples or maybe a single parent with a child, or it's very specifically for young people, which is what I read on the notice that was sent, email notice. So it sounds like Mark McNabb is using this to create his, to house his workforce, his personal workforce. And I have to object to that. I just don't agree with that. I don't think it should be used for that purpose. I think he needs to find his own means of staffing his businesses and not using the center of the heart of our historic district for housing his workforce. So I guess that's my objection to that
Thank you.
project. Thanks.
Those of you who don't know me,
It's been a little bit.
Jim Smalley, 352 Kearsarge Way. Jen's idea of having POA get input on possible lots was a very good one. You've hit the cover off the ball 2 meetings in a row. It's very good. It's efficient, pulls the workforce housing forward. Getting that input is valuable. Dagan humanized, the last meeting, Dagan humanized the current situation when he said, and I'm going to paraphrase, everyday residents have to leave the city they love because we move too slowly. Right? Every day, as we're speaking, someone's packing a box. Current zoning is like urban renewal, but it's more insidious. As instead of whole neighborhoods being destroyed and highly visible, that destruction being highly visible, under current zoning, it's an individual here, an individual there, a family that has to leave the city. It's invisible because it's diffuse. The current zoning gives eviction notices to residents every day, intentionally. And it can be prevented. The city creates the zoning, right? The city can change it. And the good folks in the planning department, I was delighted to hear that we're going to focus on zoning at this point. Because you can't scale up the municipal, you're running out of municipal lots. You can't, it's not scalable. I had a long list here, but I'm just going to go to the end of it. From 2015 to 2024, a total of 1,867 dwelling units have been approved, and another 115 were pending approval. So of that, almost 2,000 units total, 67 units of that total, 3.38%, of that total were workforce housing. You can't solve it until you solve the zoning. And the market, especially the high end of the market, you have to solve the pressure, the economic pressure from the high end of the market, because the wealthiest people can always outbid the poorer people. And as a result, because of that, that hasn't been corrected yet. And Jen's, let's focus on zoning, as Jen had said earlier. We need to change it. If you don't change it, you're not really solving the problem. It's just, we can focus on workforce housing, but until you focus on the 96% that needs to be addressed, you're not going to solve the problem. Right? Market will drive affordability if you let it. If you don't, we're going to have the same conversation, years and years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please state your name and speak into the mic.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Richard Smith, and I thought I'd kick it off. This round's on me, so drink up. So first of all, thanks for having me here and listening. And I think this is such an urgent and it's an emergency situation we're in. And I think more is happening as far as $1 million condos and hotels going into this town than action for affordable housing. Everything seems to be getting approved for them. They're getting variances. There's absolute need to keep our citizens in town, the people that grew up here, can't afford to stay here. The senior citizens have to move out. They can't afford to stay. Things aren't going to get better. They're going to get worse. I think we should look at a lot of the buildings that are already here to use. There's office buildings that people are still getting permission to build. They're sitting empty, and they're not going to fill. It's happening all over the country. People aren't looking to buy or rent office space. So perhaps the city could rent or buy that office space or partner with a developer. Maybe we should put requirements in, or I don't know how to say it, but if someone wants to develop a building, that 50% of it has to be affordable housing. That's the bottom line. Do something like that, and then we wouldn't have so many open spaces developed, or pay more attention to what we really need, and have the developers pay more attention to what we really need. Let me see if there's anything else. My memory's terrible. Maybe, I don't know if it's possible, but at meetings, every once in a while, have a legal person here, like a rotation, like if there's something to be discussed that's a legal issue, I'll have the legal department here. Somebody here from the conservation department. Have somebody here from transportation, so we can provide seniors and everybody transportation to come to these meetings, and also where they're going to be living, whether it's on Borthwick Avenue or downtown. So I think people that come to these meetings, it isn't really effective to have people talk on Zoom. I think if they come in person, even if they're nervous like I am, it's more effective that if a person's actually in the room and discussing a problem. So maybe you could get Coast or somebody else. I think Coast is what we have, and they're fantastic. That's the city, one of the things best the city provides. It'd be great to have people that can't walk here or drive be able to come here and talk and listen. Listening's important too, isn't it? So, anyway, I hope there's fast action on the affordable housing issue, because it's taken so long. Every day I read in the paper, if you look at the city comments, about variances or permits or approvals for condos and hotels. Every single day, practically. And hardly, if there's anything said about affordable housing, it just says it's being addressed. And maybe 10% of the time something actually gets done. And it's really our responsibility to get things done, not just talk about it. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public? Okay. Thank you, guys.
Do we have our next meeting?
We don't, but it looks like if it's the second, it may be April 10th.
Yeah, April 10th. Does that seem like it works for everyone if we're sticking with the same order? Okay.
I got one more idea.
Hold on, Archie. Hold
You
on.
guys had a bar here. A lot of people.
I think I can make that happen.
Okay, we are adjourned.
Wait,
Thank
did we
you.
decide?